We are now live. Good stuff. Good stuff. Right, folks. For anyone that has joined now to watch live, appreciate you putting some time aside. I genuinely believe that we'll have a constructive conversation for you today. So just by way of introduction, the topic for today is going to be around peak performance. We may slide into optimal performance, I don't know, but peak performance and business. And what we're really going to be talking about between my guest and I today is around what makes a team strive for peak performance, both from a leadership and team member perspective. So I'm quite interested to get into this one. It really does align to the work that I do. And just by way of introduction, for those that don't know who I am, my name is 𝐏𝐞𝐚𝐤, an ex-director within the recruitment sector, and now my business is called Your Results Coach. And I work with high-achieving senior business leaders on a one-to-one basis, predominantly around their own individual performance from a life and also business perspective. So I really try to channel my efforts into doing the work with the individual themselves and then looking at what type of impact that can have on their people around them in life and ultimately on their business, whatever that needs to look like. So that's me. And my guest today, who I will hand over to make his own introduction, is James Kinsley. So James, over to you.
Chris, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. Chris, it's a real pleasure to be here and to join you and have this conversation. It's a topic I feel very passionately about. I'll keep it very brief so we can get into the good stuff. So I trained as a city lawyer working for firms like Allen Overy, Clifford Chance. I then moved into investment banking at Morgan Stanley and then moved back to international law. I've worked in 6 countries now, including Hong Kong and Singapore, London, and a few others. And yeah, I'm now a partner in a city law firm. So great to be here. This is going to be a good one, I think.
Awesome, good stuff, mate. Thank you. So, and I think you've just mentioned it's really landed with me. This has actually. So as part of the conversation today, I definitely want to just have a little journey around into different parts of the world as we have this conversation. I mean, ultimately, let's just get the starting point right and think about a peak performing team. I'm probably going to end up drawing on some of my own experiences here because I believe that I've worked in some really high functioning teams, some really good quality teams, fast growth business, delivering a fantastic service and growth and numbers and all the good stuff. But if I asked you headline, James, your opinion and your definition of a peak performing team, what would you throw out there so that we can start to talk around?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. I think for me, a peak performing team is really measured or could be defined loosely, I suppose, as a team, a group of individuals that are able to perform optimally in the most challenging and stressful of situations. Because a lot of teams I've worked for and in and led, they've been doing great when times are good and people know their roles. But when things get difficult, markets get difficult or business conditions get hard, that is what shows a peak performing team emerge from a team that is really just a collection of individuals that have different skills and attributes.
Love that. You know what? And there's two thoughts I've got here now, because you're right. One is that external market conditions can be quite challenging, and I think for a lot of industries over recent years, with certainly in the UK, cost of living, has had an impact on a lot of industries, certainly industries and clients that I work with. So I think you've got the market influences where actually at a strategic and senior level, you've got to make some really bold decisions and potentially changes in direction and strategy. But I think about sort of within the business where actually there are, let's look at a service industry just for a moment. That's my background, coming from a recruitment sector where actually there are challenges around the levels of service. There are issues around the service that's being given to a particular client. I know over the years personally, I've almost rubbed my hands to say, to think to myself, right, we've got some problems here. There are issues with service. Now we've got a chance to earn our stripes and actually, deploy myself, a team, whatever it was going to be, to go and show them how we can deal with adversity. Because I guess that's the point you're leaning into, is that it's when everything's going great, numbers are where they need to be, and service is where it needs to be, and client acquisitions moving forward as you'd expect to, budgets are being achieved, and so on. Of course, that's quite a nice, easy world to live in. But it's when the chips are down, really. So yeah, is there any examples, James, that we can lean into here where you can start to think about where we can evidence where you've seen that sort of resilience coming from a team?
Yeah, I think, Chris, one of the examples that sticks out is when I was at Morgan Stanley. The time there was when a lot of European banks were in big trouble, and we were trying to bail out clients, help clients structure financing solutions. But the stuff that we were dealing with was very challenging, and it was not really part of our usual day-to-day job. It wasn't really within the skill set that we were trained for. It was something that we had to adapt to. And that situation put a lot of stress on the team. Now, where that team, or our team, then performed well is because we had exceptional leadership. I wasn't leading the team, I was a vice president then. We had exceptional leadership, and we had exceptionally high levels of trust in the leadership and the strategy and with each other. So that was a situation that was very, very challenging, and we were able to perform at our best in that situation. Conversely, and what was interesting, we can maybe touch on this later, was that the team was comprised of many different nationalities and ethnicities. And there are differences in sometimes mindset and approach. We could talk about it later maybe. But I've also worked at teams in London and led teams in London where when things go slightly wrong, then because of the trust, the leadership, authenticity, or other attributes, it's never, in my experience, it's never about a deficit of skill, because those people are usually they don't pass through the interview stage. You can obviously improve on skills, but it's usually a breakdown of attributes. And when times get difficult, that's when you see what someone's attributes are and how they fit into a team or don't fit into a team, and that affects the optimum performance. So that was quite interesting for me.
Yeah, I like that. There's a couple of things. Adaptability, that stood out at the start of that conversation. That adaptability and trust. I think there's two words that I've peeled away there, thinking, do you know what, they've landed for me there. I think that adaptability, let's just start on that just for the moment, is there are times when there's all the best laid plans in the world, the strategies are laid out, and like you say, market conditions or just in-house conditions dictate that you've got to change and navigate a different path. I think what I'd associate to this, we can probably lean into leadership styles a little bit here, is that we've got adaptability, but I think also decisiveness is something that's really important from a leadership perspective. Now, if you read the textbooks, and I want to lean into some of the bits around emotional intelligence and bias and things like that we've spoken about before the conversation, but I think when it comes to decisiveness, there are times when a leader of a team, peak performing team, does have to make decisions quickly, often on the spot, or needs to react quickly to certain conditions. Now, a lot of the textbooks that you read and a lot of advice that you'll get is around empowerment and giving your team trust and creating the right, and we will come on to this because it's important, but creating collective decisions and decisions that are right for the business going forward, that people are bought into, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to adaptability, I think decisiveness is something that needs to be in there. Yes. And there's from a leadership perspective, there needs to be, I guess the other word I'm going to drop in here now, coming into bed as we're talking, is also accountability, because a leader will have to make a decision. The team need to trust that decision is the right one at that point in time, and that accountability has to sit on that leader's shoulder, come what may. So if you maybe expand a little bit on your experiences at Morgan Stanley, is any of that what I've just mentioned there? Does that sort of fit into the circumstances that you found in that particular instance?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fascinating concepts you've drawn out. I think let's start with maybe if we start with adaptability, and if we can maybe let's group that into, if we just call it, say, part of grit, and we include courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience as what one might define as grit. Adaptability is crucial in my experience for high performing teams. If you're not adaptable, and there have been times in my career when I haven't been adaptable, and I would be honest here, I would say that adaptability is not a natural strong attribute that I have. I have to work on it, and I'm aware. I have a lot of courage, and I have a lot of perseverance. Mm-hmm. But adaptability and resilience were two attributes that I'm probably not I wasn't blessed with initially. It's a bit like a dimmer on a light switch. Adaptability is something that I work on all the time. I'm always trying to look at, okay, well, that didn't work out. How do we get past that setback? We've got to adapt. Resilience, which I would link to that sort of grit and adaptability is part of. Resilience is something that is something that's quite trainable. And that is why I've been working with coaches for a decade. So it's one reason I think that's, that maybe we can talk about later, but that is a key part. But adaptability has been the hallmark of those teams that are high performing. You mentioned accountability is key. And I love the way you touched on that, because when I've worked for teams where they've had low accountability, so the leaders are not willing to I suppose, decisively make a decision. And that's key, because if you don't have decisive decision making, you're just a solid decision maker, maybe. But if you can't do it decisively, you're not going to be effective. But when you don't have the accountability, what I've seen in teams is that you get leaders that are mediators, but they're not accountable. So they'll sit in the middle and they'll go, okay, well, that's your view, but we've got these external factors and these internal factors. What do you think here? And they'll say, oh, we can't do that because that person says that. Well, that's not a leader. That's a mediator. So a leader needs to be able to make decisive decisions. They need to be accountable. And what I've really experienced over the years is that you do not become a leader because you are promoted to a level of responsibility. You're a boss or you're a manager. It is for the people that work with you to determine whether or not you're a leader. And that's a crucial distinction. So some of the things you've mentioned, the attributes, are key components of good leadership, and also the adaptability and how it links into other groups of attributes.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I wouldn't mind drifting into some of the softer skills, because we'll talk about leader, but I do want to drift into the dynamic of this peak performing team. We recognise the fact that we've got to have a strong leader. I'm going to share a little bit. I like the fact, and I appreciate honesty, by the way. I appreciate the fact that you've thrown up there the areas where you feel you need to work. So from my own perspective over the years, you've just talked about that sort of mediator approach. I've fallen into that trap a little bit on a couple of occasions, where the hope is that you've got buy-in from a group of people, but of course, often there is such diversity in the way that those people function, the way that they think, that often it can be quite difficult to get that across the board in a broad, a decent-sized team, to be able to get that to happen. And I've fallen into that trap sometimes, where I'm thinking, if I can get everyone bought into this strategy and this direction of travel, we're winning and off we go. But often there is always going to be someone that may not necessarily wholly agree with that direction of travel, but they'll be on the bus. They'll get on the bus and they'll come for the journey, but might take a little bit more cajoling and convincing, should we say? So that's something I've needed to work on, and I suppose the reason I almost went from one end of the spectrum to the other, and I think I hope this is a helpful share, is that at the start of my leadership journey, when I started off as a boss, as you put it, quite rightly, I was promoted into a role where I was managing a group of people. I did behave a little bit like a boss. I think that I had got some influences from my earlier career days that maybe influenced what I thought was the right way to lead and manage people, and actually on reflection wasn't quite right. So I was probably a little bit too, I wouldn't say a dictator, because I'm certain I'm not built that way, but maybe trying to be a little bit too forceful, a little bit too we're doing it this way, a little bit too much direction, to the flip side, where I actually had my fingers burned and almost then went the whole opposite end of the spectrum and tried to mediate too much, to the point actually where I feel like I've found this sort of landing point somewhere in the middle, where you have to react to different situations in different ways. And I think that's maybe where we could possibly start to lean into a little bit around emotional intelligence, because it's a topic, I know we spoke about it, but it's something that I've sort of learned about in quite early in my career, and a topic that I see being promoted as actually one of the real key attributes, not just in a leader, but in an entire team, is a level of emotional intelligence. So that's myself. You learn as you go sometimes, and I've definitely had to do a lot of work myself on that style, you can't have one style for every single team and every single business and every single individual. You've got to move a little bit, but actually finding a sweet spot where when you need to, you make a decision. Guys, I'm making this decision. It's sitting on my shoulders and we're running this way. Come with me. Where there are going to be times when maybe you do want to sit down and you do want to get a little bit more of a collective buy-in on certain projects or strategies or whatever it's going to be. But let's just lean into some of the softer bits now around, because I like this topic, around emotional intelligence and what that actually means. So I'd love your input on this in terms of your view on this. And I know it's a topic you learnt about at quite an early age. Maybe let's just see how the conversation revolves around some of those softer skills, and maybe we can start to dip into the dynamic of a peak performing team, and not just a peak performing team, but maybe we may be able to share some examples of where actually a team hasn't performed. I've got some examples where a team hasn't performed particularly well, and maybe draw out some of the reasons why that was. So if we go back to the start, emotional intelligence, let's lean into that a little bit, James, and just see where that takes us if we can. So give me your view, give me your opinion, your definition.
Well, I think this is a fascinating topic. I remember we were talking a few days ago about emotional intelligence. I remember when I was 9, my mother, who was a senior HR director, bought me, I think it's Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. I obviously didn't read it when I was 9. And I think I found it in a dusty bookshelf when I was about 17, 18. But she would always emphasize the importance of that. And it's only been throughout my career I've really understood that it is one of the closest things you can have to a superpower. Not only if you're leading a team, but if you're in a team and you're trying to perform well. So then we come to the definition of it. Now, I don't know the textbook definition. I can't remember what I got out of that book years ago. But for me, would be the ability, like situational awareness, to gauge what your actions and behaviors, how they affect other people, and how other people's impacts and actions affect you. And that is absolutely critical. And I've seen teams being destroyed by leaders not using appropriate emotional intelligence, because everyone is different. Some very high performers in a team thrive, for example, as you will know, will thrive off regular feedback. And that doesn't make them needy. It just means that certain personality types, they like to be told when they're doing well, but they also value feedback when they're not doing so well. So if you've got a leader that just leaves one of these high performers and doesn't give them any feedback, that can be very, very stressful for a high performer. Other people, on the other hand, don't like that level of feedback. So emotional intelligence, coming back to what is the situational awareness? How are my behaviors impacting other members of the team? I've never seen a team perform at its best when there were low level emotional intelligence. I've seen them perform well in spite of themselves, and then a stressful situation come along and suddenly half the team resigns. So that's my experience. From what I've seen, emotional intelligence doesn't vary that much between different cultures. It might manifest differently, but it is something that is one of the most basic human conditions in terms of having degrees of it. That's been my experience.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that the key bit, I'm going to throw my really simple view in and amongst what I'm going to say now on emotional intelligence. So self-awareness, self-regulation, and ability. And so I would say one of the biggest qualities with a strong emotional intelligence, this is in team and leadership, is an ability to debate constructively without that being I'm right, you're wrong, an argument. In actual fact, that if there's something that is put on the table where there may be a different opinion, I wouldn't say disagreement, but there's differing opinions on a topic or an idea or whatever it is, is that there's an ability to sit and discuss that in a constructive, professional manner. And actually with the objective being, we need to find the right answer here for the business. Let's say in this instance, we've got to find the right answer for the business, not the right answer for me because I want to be right, not the right answer for me because I want to be right, but actually we want to find the right answer for this situation for the business so we can then action it and move forward. And that's something I see being quite a considerable strength in a peak performing team, is that first and foremost, you're quite happy to receive some feedback when someone doesn't disagree with you, delivered in the right way, of course, but equally able to accept that challenge and be able to then articulate a conversation that can then come to the right solution.
Yeah.
Now, the things I'm going to throw in there, and I do try and look at things in really simplistic ways sometimes, but with this, I keep my fingers locked in here on this example, is that there isn't really a lot of room for ego in this situation. There's a time and a place for some form of ego. But I think in this situation, when it comes to the example I'm sharing here, I'm not too sure whether ego is particularly beneficial, where it's more of my ego is saying I need to make sure that I'm right in this situation. And I think also what's important is that it's probably a little bit of growth mindset here. I'm not going to go too far. I don't want to maybe go too far into growth mindset unless it's something you want to talk about, James. But I think there's also an acceptance that sometimes you can be wrong, you can change, you can grow, you can fail, you can make mistakes, and that's all okay. You know, it's not we don't then ridicule someone for making a mistake. We just learn from it, apply some learnings, apply what we're going to do if it happens next time round, and off you go. So ego sort of sits in the middle of all this for me, where I've seen some really horrific examples of ego. I'll share a little example. I mean, obviously not to name and shame anybody, because it's not about that at all. But I've been in a situation where I've been in a team, and one of the challenges has been that there's been ego in that team. That's meant that actually I would say that they felt a little bit threatened. When I spoke to a mentor and a coach that was working with this team in the business, his view was that actually it was being driven from some insecurities and he felt a little bit threatened. But the way that he was dealing with that was very aggressive, very manipulative, actually was creating a real awful, corrupt sort of culture with some of the sort of senior team that was working together. And actually that created a considerable amount of stress for me personally and just for the wider team. So I'm going to pause just for a second, because I think it's helpful that we can draw on some maybe not so good examples, but I obviously want to go back into what makes a team achieve peak performance. So if we think about maybe some of the pitfalls, maybe, James, with where things can go wrong within a team, give me some idea of your thoughts on that.
Well, I think from what I've seen and experienced, the things that go wrong, they start at the top and they cascade down. Mm-hmm. And that it doesn't, everything starts, in my experience, the worst performing teams have leaders that are not effective, and then you find that undermines trust. And I'll give an example, but that undermines trust. When the trust is gone, you then may also find that various attributes are not present for people there, because, as you know, a team is really not just a sum of the parts. If you bought all of the best components for a car from different manufacturers, it wouldn't make a good car. It's how they interact. So where I've seen it go wrong is ego is a big thing. I think maybe to flip it round, I've seen, for me, where it went wrong, the first team I led was, I thought that I had to be right on everything. And I didn't appreciate actually initially that a high performing team is able to speak truth to power. I'm not saying I had a lot of power, but the expression. And so that for me was, looking back on it, a sign that the team wasn't performing well. So if you're not able to speak truth to power, if you're not able to feel like you can suggest that actually there might be a better way of doing things, if you're not able to be authentic, then there's probably a dynamic in the team. There's probably not enough trust, and those have been the worst team situations. Conversely, when I started leading a team in Asia, I think it was one of the teams in Singapore, culturally, some of the people working for me would have been more reluctant to speak up to senior people. Culturally, that would have been harder for them to do. And one of the most, I suppose, the best moments of leading that team was when one of the really junior members actually said to me, James, your idea is fine, but I think actually that's not the best way to do it for X, Y, and Z. And it was so satisfying because the tremendous courage she would have had, but also she would have felt secure to say that, because the way I took that was, I'm so glad you said that to me. Now I always encourage people. Now it's harder to do in certain cultural aspects, but that was a sign the team was going really well. And it was a conscious thing to try and remove the ego as much as possible, and remember that really what the leader is doing is actually there to serve them effectively. When you just flip it around, that's when teams fall apart. Now, I don't know what anyone else's experience had, but we've probably all experienced situations when a leader has made a wrong decision. Everyone's afraid to speak up to it, and then of course you get the cognitive bias kicking in. They're doubling down, and they don't have the emotional awareness to realize that doubling down is actually sometimes a bad strategy. So then the whole team spirals, and before you know it, the trust is blown. And once trust is gone, I mean, as I said about leadership, trust is not an attribute or a skill. Trust is something that is bestowed on you by the people that are working with you. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
no, it's good. Listen, it's a conversation. It's great. No, I like, because it gets my grey matter wearing. So okay, so we've done the ego thing. We've got the trust part, and I think it's massively important. What you just talked about there, it lands with me. This is a peak performing team. I was sort of doing this whole, when we talk about EQ and emotional intelligence, is that ability to be able to just debate things professionally, you know, and if there's a different opinion, you're able to talk about it and create the right answer. And I suppose I was thinking, I was talking a lot there about inter-team, but of course, being able to comfortably talk to your leader, your manager, your director, your whoever, you know, your line manager, whatever terminology we're going to give them, and challenge their thought processes and come up with ideas, and for those ideas to be embraced, discussed, considered. And ultimately, the answer of whether that idea was used or not was all about it being right for the business again, because that's ultimately what we're always trying to achieve. If we remove any bias, any I'm right, you're right, any ego, anything like that, ultimately we're trying to create a decision that's right for the business. I mean, that is such an empowering place for a team to be, to know, as you've just given a great example. I loved in the sort of the last decade I've worked and had some really good quality people working in a team. With me, I prefer to use, and they've been brilliant. But always, I said, look, if you feel that, you know, that you've got a different way, a different idea, and you have got a different thought process, you've got a different way of maybe approaching this particular challenge, because if a peak performing team delivers when it's challenging, I've always wanted people to come to me. That isn't to say that I've always agreed with what they've come to. Often I may have challenged back. So I'm not convinced that's going to work because of whatever reason it's going to be, but always delivered in a fair and transparent way. And just to say, look, I genuinely appreciate you coming to me with that. Keep it going, you know. So I've just got a comment that came in from D, and this is from D. So essentially creating psychological safety, maybe, and D, that's 100% the situation we're trying to create, really, in a peak performing team. I think that's exactly what James has alluded to. This has been a common theme over probably a couple of 3 recent live conversations that I've held, and I think when it comes to a peak performing team, there's a balance that I believe there's a balance, and I'm going to share this, James, and I'd love your input on this, really. So we stay on this theme just for a second. Is that so? Psychological safety, the comfort to be as a member of a team, to feel comfortable raising your hand if there's a problem, raising your hand if you've made a mistake, raising your hand if you've got an idea, raising your hand if you think you can do something different or better, whatever it's going to be, and be comfortable in being able to have those conversations. That is a great place to be. I think the flip side to all this is that we've got to be a little bit careful around the culture that we create in the team, because we don't want a situation where every single thing is being debated and challenged and so on and so forth. Because I think we can actually create a culture of things just taking forever to get over the line and get done. But equally, there's also got to be a point where people understand in a peak performing team that the direction of travel's being set. we know we've got to get certain things delivered, and maybe the project is time precious, or maybe what needs to be actioned is something that's got to be actioned quite efficiently. Sometimes you just got to knuckle down and get the job done. So psychological safety, James, that Dee's mentioned there, it ties into the comment you'd made about someone in your team coming and challenging you to do something better. So just can you expand on psychological safety for me and your view on what that means to you, please?
Yeah, it's a great concept and a great question from Dee. Psychological safety is very hard to define, but I know it when I feel it. Mm-hmm. And it's about feeling safe. You could say safe to be authentic, safe to speak truth to power, safe to raise a different view. What it doesn't mean, in my mind, and as you said, it doesn't mean that everyone will have an equal view, an equal input on every issue. It doesn't mean that things will be taken always by a democratic vote. It doesn't undermine the type of decision making for the type of business and the type of environment that is necessary. And if we take an extreme, I suppose, example, and I'm probably drawing on this because a lot of my family are from military backgrounds, there would be plenty of situations where there would be psychological safety, but the views of various people would be ignored because ultimately the leader would make the decision. But you're feeling safe to at least raise that. But psychological safety is really important, because if we actually look at maybe what a not psychologically safe environment looks like, then really I've experienced that as a key breakdown for teams. Because if you don't have that safety, what you then create is potentially hypervigilance, and you have people worried about what other people are doing, more thinking about the politics and thinking about the various ropes and tripwires. And I can't say that, even though it's the right thing to do. And that leads very quickly to, first of all, we don't focus on the job, but also it leads to a very quick breakdown in communication and trust. And if you combine that with a lack of authenticity, not having psychological safety is very damaging. And I suppose maybe the easier way to say it is every high performing team I've worked in has had, to a greater or lesser extent, some levels of psychological safety, as much as possible. And in different stages of my career, there have been more or less levels. The hardest team environment I ever worked in terms of the demands of the job was probably at Morgan Stanley. But they had very high levels of psychological safety. But that didn't undermine from the fact that it was an incredibly tough job. It just was not tough because of the internal composition of the team.
I like that. Just another couple of comments that were made. So Stephen Hines, when a leader creates that atmosphere of trust, the best idea wins, not the loudest. I like the way you've worded that, Stephen. Thanks for contributing. I think it's what we talk about. Just get ego out of the way. This is just let's get the right decision, the best idea, the right idea. That's the one that's going to work best for the situation we're in. So, like that's that. Great. And Peter mentioned a great conversation with right mix of theory and real life situations, highlighting the fact that trust and communication are central to getting any team to work. So I think trust is landing a lot here, and I'm with you. I think that having that ability, I think it goes both ways, doesn't it? Trusting a leader. I think that's the starting point, because the leader ultimately is the person that's going to create the culture for the team. But I think then equally from the leader into the team is having trust in the team, that they'll hold their hand if they've made a mistake. If they agree they're going to do something, they go and get it done. And equally then is creating that trust within the team. So if all of those dynamics are satisfied, we're in a position where we've got quite a nice platform really for a peak performing team. Something I'll just lean into another experience. I worked in a recruitment business overall for like 20 years. And the latter part of my career, the team was I classed that as a peak performing team. So we grew the business from a sort of virtually a standing start, and by the time it was finished, it was actually sold. Actually, it gone to sort of £200 million turnover. Just a real good solid. There's businesses in the sector that grew quicker. but the growth that we achieved was extremely sustainable. We made commitments to clients that we delivered on. Operationally and service-wise, the service was impeccable. The data and the analysis that we did was very thorough. The culture was open and honest and very accountable, so people were empowered to be able to deliver a job and get a job done. But equally, the support it was a very hands-on style. The team of directors, we were very, very hands-on. We very much still had our sleeves rolled up, and if we had to get into the trenches with the teams, we did that. And I know in a number of sort of appraisals and one-to-ones, that was something that was commented throughout the business, is that it was respected and actually gave staff comfort that when the proverbial hit the fan, when times get hard, actually, I know the directors are going to roll the sleeves up and they're going to be with us at the coalface to get these things sorted. And I guess that's a bolt on to psychological safety. I guess it's a bolt on to just leading by example. You know, it's because you mentioned this, didn't you, in terms of, you use the word trenches, I'm sure you did, in terms of how you sort of operate and functioning in your current role and do in business as well.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's a really important point. And I think it applies to all levels of the team as well, because there are different across all hierarchies here. Leading by example, it doesn't mean you have to be the leader of the whole team. You could be at any level, but that's really important. And I've noticed over the years, I mean, my approach to my team is, if they're working, if they're up, and it's not that often, but if they're working, till, I remember an example in Singapore actually, when I think it was the second or third night in a row when the team was up to 3, 4 a.m. It was after COVID, during 2021. Financing rates were cheap and the market was exploding. And one of my associates called me up in tears one afternoon, and she just said, "I just don't think I can carry on." And I listened. It's important, you listen. She wasn't calling me for me to solve it. The first thing she was doing is calling because she felt comfortable to tell me that she just was having trouble. And we talked round it, and we talked about, well, this is going to happen, and then you'll get this time off. But I also made it really clear, and I do this with all of my associates, is if you're up till 11 or 12 or beyond, if you're working or doing that, I will be working there. I will be with you. I won't necessarily be doing the same job as you, right? Because we have different roles in the team. But I'm not going to leave you by yourself. So you're up at 3 in the morning, I'll be there, because you'll be doing that thing with a loan agreement. I'll be doing something else, but we will be there. I'm in it with you. I'm not just going to walk away. I mean, I had a boss in London once who, he left me as a junior lawyer. I was terrified of some of the deals, the timing, making myself ill because of the fear of this deal. And he used to say on a Friday night, "Any questions, give me a call." He'd walk out and leave his mobile on his desk. And that is key, I think, for a high performance team. You need to know that the people around you have got your back. They might not be doing your exact job, but they've got your back. And that really goes a long way in my experience.
Love that. In my head, you've just said the words that I have got in my head as you were talking. Then it's about, I've got your back. So not only has the leader got the team's back, I've got your back, the trust there, I'm there, I'll support you. But actually, within a team, that then start. If I think about some of the teams I've worked with, going back at 15 years or so, in the team, the ones that have really thrived, the ones that I've thoroughly enjoyed working with, the ones where I've gone above and beyond to deliver, is where the team is connected and everyone's got each other's back. You're covering each other, you're multitasking, whatever it is. It was actually one of the most, probably one of the most enjoyable periods of my career, going back to the start of the start of the century, early 2000s. It was just fun. And I knew that people were with me. I knew that people were around me, and I knew that we'd all help each other out. That was actually something particularly valued from an in-team perspective. Diversity. I want to just touch on this a little bit, because it's the diversity, equity, inclusion, big agenda now in business. Anyway, certainly in the UK, a very diverse workforce nowadays. We've got a lot of migration over the years, which has really diversified the base, but not just from a geographical or nationality perspective. And I know we can touch on that potentially, but also from a sort of the diversity of just character, nature, attitude, personality, all those sort of things, which leans into a little bit of bias, of course, as well. So let's think a little bit about the diversity of a team and how that can complement a peak performing team, James. And I know you obviously travel now, and your business takes you into different parts of the world. So I'd quite like to get your thoughts on this now, and how a diverse team can contribute towards it being peak performing.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. I think it depends. The caveat, it depends on what the team does, what they're trying to achieve. Yep. But in my experience, there are certain ignoring skills because it's very job specific, but there are certain attributes that are quite essential in a team, and they complement each other. And I think complementary attributes that mesh well in a team would be you would want, you need the right amount of people with the grit, with the courage, and the perseverance and the resilience, right? That perseverance to call, the 20th client, or go for the 20th meeting without getting a win, knowing that your 21st meeting might be the big one. That takes a lot of resilience and perseverance, and it takes a lot of courage. Those sort of capabilities or attributes, in my experience, you also need people there to team that with drive, right? Whether it's they have that, but you also need people with self-efficacy. That's something that knits well in. If you just have grit, but you don't have self-efficacy, meaning you don't have the belief in your ability to achieve your goals, then that can be a problem if you don't have it. But teams need to balance that grit with aspects of drive, and then you add the leadership on. I mean, there is no team environment I've worked on where empathy is not good. I would say that empathy is something that it needs to be dialed down and up. And actually, this is beyond probably the scope of this, but there's some really interesting studies about cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And in certain businesses, you do not want your leader to have too much emotional empathy for the business, because you can't make difficult decisions. I remember when Lehman crashed, decisions we had to make on the business were very, very challenging. And so the leaders making those decisions, they needed cognitive empathy, but they couldn't be overwhelmed by emotional empathy, because it wouldn't have worked for the business. So you need that right mix. I think team ability is key, and they're probably attributes that work in all team environments. The humility, that humor helps, and conscientiousness. I don't think there's a precise formula of what knits these teams together perfectly, because it depends on the type of team. But you definitely need a mix. And the thing that I think is probably one of the most undervalued skills or attributes is actually, I talked about self-efficacy, which is, you need to be very careful in a team about the self-limiting beliefs. You need a team that really believes in their ability to achieve their own goals and the team's goals. And for me, I think traditionally I've scored quite high on many of the leadership attributes and the grit, but I've always traditionally lacked ability to sort of believe in my ability to achieve my goals. I think there's an insecurity there somewhere. And for me, that attribute is something that over 10 years I've worked on with executive coaches, because it's pretty important. So yeah, maybe there wasn't the perfect answer. It's quite hard to knit the perfect team, but I think those are some of the different factors that go in to a high performing team.
I like that. And limited release legacy chatter. I've never worked, myself included, I've never worked with a client that hasn't had some sort of thing going on around that. That's just a human thing. But but the idea is doing the work on it is just unbelievably powerful. So I'm just going to add a little bit to what you were saying then around the high functioning peak performing team. I know there's some comments, so I'm going to go back. There's some comments I want to pick up just in a second. There's a couple of questions I'd like to just pick off whilst we're at this point, James. But being solution focused, this ties into the whole limiting belief thing. So that, look, going back many a year when my lifestyle probably wasn't quite conducive of a healthy headspace and actually a high performing headspace, I could be a little bit whingy, a little bit moany, and I've seen it in a lot of people, and it's hard to shake that off sometimes if you don't do the right work to resolve that. But the transition into having a more optimistic, positive, not happy clap here, we're not talking about, but somebody that the mantra in a high performing team that I worked in, sort of for around a decade, the reason that team, in my opinion, was so successful, forget being organized, forget having accountability, forget having great people around you, forget being the trust, everything, forget all the things we've spoken about. That team was solution focused, where the mantra was, whatever the problem we face, there is an answer to resolve that problem. Period. That's it. Whatever problem we encounter, we are going to find a way to solve it and navigate it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every outcome from that problem isn't necessarily not an ideal one, like maybe losing a piece of business, for example. But there was always going to be a way of navigating that situation, and that's something that was instilled in the senior team, and that cascades throughout the team, so that actually when the proverbial hits the fan, and we're then, if you remember at the start of the conversation, we want the team to stand up and be counted, have the grit and resilience when times are hard. The way to help to achieve that headspace and mindset is to give everybody the confidence. We're going to sort this together, with me at the helm, leader steering the ship, sitting on my shoulders. We're going to resolve this. Now, I might lead the same. I might have to dictate. I often do this in challenging times. My natural trait would be that I'd go into more of a, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z pretty sharpish to get this situation resolved. That's sort of quite a natural sort of behaviour of my own. But I think that it's really important that then I just wanted the team to come with me. Just come with me. This is what we're going to do. A few extra ideas. Let's put them on the table and let's just go ahead and get this sorted. Let's get this problem resolved. So when it comes to grit and resilience, I think embedding an attitude of whatever comes our way, we're going to fix it team, I think it's really healthy. There's a couple of comments I just want to go to, James, if we can. So, Peter, thanks for your interaction, Peter. Hopefully you're back because I think your screen had frozen. I think ours have been okay. So, situational awareness of the leader is important, as the leadership style of the team may need to change dependent on the tasks and challenges the team is dealing with. Fair comment? What would you say to that, James?
Was that from Peter?
Yes.
Peter, I think that's a great comment. 100%. I think that is such an important comment. And, there are times when a leader needs to lead, and there are other times when there are other people in the team that will lead on a specific task. And I think being able to recognize that, I think that's crucial. A really good comment. That resonates.
Almost, I guess, at times you've got to be able to wear a few different hats, dependent on the situation and dependent on people that are actually involved in that situation as well. So that's interesting. Another good comment from Peter, and I'm nodding to it. Nobody should be the taken or quota diversity hire. I agree. Now, there's a real danger here that businesses that are on a real mission to have that diverse workforce, to be able to publish statistics that show that they have a diverse workforce, I 100% agree. I think in situations, it's a little bit like we talked about the dynamics of a team, and there's a problem. We're going to debate what we think is going to be the right course of action. Doesn't mean you're right, doesn't mean you're right, but we're going to take the right course of action to resolve an issue. Similar scenario when you're actually hiring into a business is hire based on the attributes, skills, experience, attitude, all the things that, and are they going to be a cultural and person fit into this peak performing team? So I think I like that point. James, have you got any feedback on that in terms of Peter's comment? Nobody should be taken. Nobody should be the token or quota diversity hire.
I think in diversity, I've experienced it in my own career when there's been no diversity and you've just had an echo. and leads to poor strategy, poor execution, and the business withers. I think having diverse members of the team, different backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures is really important. And the team I work for at Morgan Stanley, was incredibly diverse in many areas, and that really contributed well. But they were also very good at their jobs, and they were very good at their jobs. And so I think, yes, diversity is hugely important. It's essential for teams, always based on competencies as well.
Perfect. And a question from Hannah. Hannah has asked, so any thoughts on how to balance building, conserving a culture of psychological safety when facing a situation of needing to performance manage someone to help them improve technically?
The last bit cut off. Sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry, Hannah.
So any thoughts on how to balance building, conserving a culture of psychological safety when facing a situation of needing to performance manage someone to help them improve technically?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. The times I've experienced that, in my experience, the two aren't mutually exclusive. I think it depends. When I've seen this, when I've had to do this, it depends on how I performance manage. And if I performance manage for technical reasons in a way that is authentically linked to improving them, therefore improving the team, then you can still maintain the psychological safety. Where I think it is tricky is when performance management is weaponized as a tick the box precursor to get rid of someone, because then immediately the psychological safety evaporates and it's not really performance management at that point. So I think it's a very delicate balance, Hannah. It's a great question, and I think it depends on why it's used and how it's used.
Yeah, I think, it'd be interesting to understand the dynamic of the team and the individual in question, actually, just to get a bit more information. But I think my view would be very similar to yours, James, is that, if the performance management is actually we want to get rid of this person, that's basically the mantra, well, then psychological safety is relatively shot. If, from the way that you've worded that, Anna, it's performance manage someone to help them improve technically, that reads to me like the mantra of what you're trying to achieve here is to help somebody from a skills perspective. And then we've already mentioned, I think skills, they can be taught, they can be trained, they can be improved, so hopefully, approaching that in an emotionally intelligent way, from a supportive perspective, with realistic actions from the back of that, realistic timescales, achievable milestones for them to demonstrate changes and improvements in their technical ability. Actually, what you could find there is something that just knocks your psychological safety up to an unbelievable level. Now I've been in positions where I've been able to improve someone's technical ability or someone's performance. Of course, the adverse effect is that, sometimes it just doesn't quite work out. And unfortunately, by the time you've committed enough time, support, and effort into someone's improvement or change, unfortunately, you've had to let them go. But I think if a team can see that you and the business, I'm not sure of your role, Hannah, I can only see your name on the screen, but if they can see that actually you've had every good intention to help this individual and they've just not quite been able to get to the level you've needed them to, and then there's been an amicable parting of company, exited out the business professionally, everything done according to plan, no backstabbing, none of the nonsense that can go on sometimes when somebody's left, I expect that the psychological safety can remain. But I think the word that James used is a good one. It's pretty delicate, let's be brutally honest. So yeah, hopefully you handle that well, and fingers crossed, you can get the development right with the individual and they start to stay part of the team. Happy days. Yeah, done that. Hannah just said thanks, great. All right, well, if you want to keep them, Hannah, then fingers crossed, with a good approach, you'll get them to where they need to be. If you want to keep them, it'll probably be a sign that they probably want to stay with you as well. So hopefully, some support and some constructive conversations, all good. Comment from Stephen: I'm enjoying James's thoughtful responses, particularly in his courageous vulnerability and accepting his own limiting beliefs at times. Good stuff. But yeah, I think it's very important that people share. We're not all robots. We're human beings at the end of the day. So thanks for that comment, Stephen. Now, James, you won't believe this, but we're at 55 minutes, and I always try and get these conversations wrapped up in about an hour. So I would say that we're probably in a place where this conversation has got so much more legs in it, to be honest with you. There's so much more, so much further we can go. Is there anything else that you feel really pressing, James, that you want to sort of flirt out for conversation before we start trying to draw ourselves to a natural conclusion? Is there anything we've not spoken about yet that's really pressing for you?
Well, I think, Chris, I've really enjoyed this conversation. You're right. We could talk a lot more about this, and the interactions have been fantastic. The thing that I would say is when people talk about leadership, sometimes people think they're talking about a senior person or a boss or whatever that means. But really, I think the thing that I try to do, and I tried to do it too late in my career, but is anyone can be the leader or try and be the leader that they want to have leading them. And a lot of people have a leadership influence of certain people in the organization. Excuse me. So whether or not one is in a formal role as a leader, it's important that they try and be the leader that they want to work for, because there are a lot of really bad leaders out there. There are teams that aren't, it will never always be possible to work in a team that performs well. Sometimes you just can't change it, but you can change the way you approach deploying your skills, and you can change ways in which you identify your strong attributes and you work on those that aren't. You can be that. You don't need to wait for a certain time in your life or a certain role. You can start at any level, and I think that's the key message I would give.
Awesome, good stuff. Okay, well, what? So we'll draw it to a conclusion now, James. I think that I've enjoyed the conversation and it's flown, which is sign of a decent chat. To be honest with you, I really hope there's been some good quality value for people who've been watching as well. I will share this with anyone that's registered with the event anyway, so there'll be a link that I'll send out over the next 24 hours. I'm going to start uploading these up onto my own sort of YouTube website, so people have got access to them and can watch them as and when they need to. So I'll share some links for that. So if we think about 3 takeaways, James, let's try and draw a summary, and I quite like doing this in terms of three takeaway actions or three considerations that people can take away from today. What would you? Let's piece them together for ourselves. What would be the first thing that you'd maybe suggest that people take away from today's conversation?
Without trust, you will never have an optimum performance team. I believe that is the bedrock of a high performance team. That would be number one.
So trust. So we've got that. So okay. So number one is work tirelessly to develop and earn the trust within a team. That's really important. The second thing we talked about here, we talked about the diversity of a team, but what I think we've sort of landed loud and clear is that a peak performing, optimal performing, high performing team will have individuals that have a belief and a grit and a determination to deliver and persevere, because we talked about the fact that peak performance kicks in when times are hard. So I think that's something that I feel has come out loud and clear from today's conversation, is around that grit and perseverance of team members in that team. And if you were going to wrap up the third, what would be the third takeaway that's resonated for yourself, James?
It would probably be something. It would probably be either empathy and authenticity. Right now, if people want to make an immediate self-assessment or an immediate change the way the team dynamic is, they need to think about their empathy and their authenticity, because again, authenticity is so important, and it's not something. So other people can pick up very easily when other people are not being authentic. Right? It's very hard for people to pick up when they're not being authentic. They can usually work out what their authentic self is because they're at home, they're with their family, their friends. But authenticity and empathy, and if you want to put that under the banner of perhaps emotional intelligence, I think is maybe my third.
Love that. To be honest, the banner's the one for me. I think we can put it all under that. It's a big banner, by the way, but emotional intelligence, I think, is a huge. It's a big old topic in itself. So I think that has provided a cracking summary. Just last 2 comments before we close up. So Peter, leadership can be seen as a mentality, and a manager as a title. Agreed. And Stephen, leading up is definitely a thing. Leading up, that was when you were talking about the fact that whatever level you're at, you're developing and building those leadership behaviours and skills. So great. Right, we're done. James, I've enjoyed that. So thanks for your time. If anyone's got any questions, anyone's got any more comments to make, by all means, reach out directly to James, reach out directly to myself. Anyone that's registered for the event, I will share the link with anyway. And if anyone's watching this on playback, again, thanks for sharing your time. My name's Chris Howe. I am your results coach, and I genuinely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. James, thanks for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for your input. Good man.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you all.
Good man. It's all good.